Hello everyone, welcome to my pleasure dome. This is Balkwell, and by this, I mean me. I am Balkwell, and today we're going to talk about War and Peace. I decided to make a somewhat impromptu video specifically about the romance between Natasha and Andrei in War and Peace, just because I happened to be thinking about it yesterday and continued to think about it today, up until the present moment, at which time I am currently thinking about it and will be speaking to you about it presently. I will warn you in advance, if you do not know the events of the entirety of the novel War and Peace and would not like to know them at the present moment, I would recommend you not watch this video. I'm going to be discussing things that happened from the beginning to the end of the novel. If you already know about them from reading the book, or just know about them from some other way, or if you don't mind learning about them from me, and not from the horse's mouth, if you will, you may continue watching. I will allow it. So, Natasha and Andrei from War and Peace. I think the love between Natasha and Andrei is perhaps my favorite love story in literature, and in part it's because it's really not a realistic love story. I mean, there are some stories where it's two people and you can see the way they build their lives together in a way that you can imagine in your own life. The way people fall in love and get married and build their lives around each other, even though it's complicated and worldly things get in the way and such forth. Then there are these literary loves that are larger than life, that don't really make sense on a practical level and are almost not destined for this world, right? They're almost too good to be true. They love each other in a way that makes life impossible and that the world makes impossible for them as well. And these sort of loves, they're not aspirational in any sense. They're often very strange and probably dysfunctional, but they're beautiful in this way that things are beautiful that can't exist, right? And that's sort of the realm that Natasha and Andrei occupy in this novel. However, it's important to make clear that the characters in Tolstoy's works, while having these larger-than-life aspects to them, while representing certain facets or aspects of being a human being, are also, or do also, feel like real people. They make real people decisions. They change their minds. They change throughout the course of the story, and they have these large aspects of them, but they also have these small, weird quirks about them that make them feel like people you could actually meet. So Prince Andrei, at the beginning of the story, he's a very cynical man, and he's a very sort of emotionally detached person, a cool, calm sort of character, and very stern. And part of this is to do with his family. His father, he lives with his father and his sister on an estate way outside of society, and they're reclusive. His father is a military man. He's very stern. He doesn't express feelings. He doesn't really seem to have feelings besides sort of bitterness or disappointment. Very emotionally dead. His sister is actually a similar type of person, but almost in the opposite respect. She's extremely pious. She secludes herself from the world for the sake of religion, and she doesn't want to connect with other people. All three of them sort of see society as this evil for various reasons. In the case of Andrei, the sort of evils of society is simply that it's frivolous. That these people, it's shallow. These people talk about things that they don't know about. They don't learn anything. They just talk for the sake of talking. And they buy these expensive clothes and they go for these dances and all this stuff that doesn't mean anything. It has no practical value either. So Andrei is sort of this archetype of maturity, a sort of cynical, jaded maturity. And on the other hand, we have Natasha, and Natasha is the embodiment of youth, of joyful innocence. Natasha, when we meet her, is still a child. She's 13 at the beginning of the novel. Later on, she's, I believe, 16, somewhere around 16 to 18 in the later parts of the novel. And everything about her screams youth. Not only her looks, but the way she carries herself in the world. She has this sort of innocence and naivete where she believes that the world revolves around her, essentially, which we all do, basically, at that age. When she's happy, she thinks the world is happy. When she's sad, the world is sad. And it's not just that, but that the world wants the best for her. She has this belief that comes from living in a sort of happy and supportive family where you just think everyone wants their best interests and you can't imagine being betrayed or being misused, right? And so these two characters exist in stark contrast at the beginning of the novel. And we see the very first thing that Andrei is talking about when he's speaking to Pierre Bezukhov at the beginning. He's very unhappy with his wife. He recommends Pierre not get married. And Andrei's idea of love is this very material thing, almost like I was talking about before, as opposed to a tragic and heavenly love. His is a very material, you get married to this person because they have the right amount of money, the right connections, and then you live together even if you don't like them. And you just make it work or you don't. I mean, in his case, he doesn't care what his wife does. He'd rather leave her somewhere and go off to do his own thing. That's his idea of love, his very jaded idea of love. Natasha, on the other hand, when we first meet her, she's engaged in this youthful flirtation with this young man, Boris. And part of the fun for her in this flirtation is that Boris is going away to the army quite soon. And so all of this is a sort of game. She doesn't actually have to live with Boris and go through the trials and tribulations of love and life with Boris. She can just flirt, have some fun, give him a kiss, hide away in the garden, knowing that this can't possibly come to anything. It's just fun, right? And in a certain way, she's almost breaking her heart on purpose, just to see how it feels, because this sort of thing doesn't have consequences. And that's part of being youthful. She's playing at love, really. And when we look at these two ideas of love, obviously neither of them is correct. In an absolute terms, are universally correct. Andrei's is extremely cynical based on his experiences and based on his circumstances. He doesn't really like his wife. And Natasha's is based on her circumstances of being young, of being allowed to make mistakes, and knowing things will just turn out in the end, right? She has this endless amount of hope because she has no idea what the future holds. She has no idea what, and not only what it holds, but what type of things it can hold, what type of experiences, and what types of emotions it can bring about. Whereas Andrei feels that he knows. He feels he knows life. He's reached the end of it, as far as he's concerned. Aside from this contrast, we have a sort of philosophical contrast. Andrei is very detached, and he looks at the world from an almost objective fashion. And you can see this in the way he talks to Pierre about marriage. He treats his experiences almost as a science. This happened to me, therefore this is the way that marriage is, and this is the way the world works. This is how things are. Not, I'm doing this, but this is happening. Whereas for Natasha, she's much more in the moment. She's experiencing life fully with almost every cell of her body. She can experience things, right? When she's happy, she's over the moon. Every hair on her head is happy. When she's sad, every hair on her head is sad. And so we have this ability to live in the moment for Natasha and this inability for Andrei. And obviously, Natasha's situation is nicer, just in a pure sort of pleasure aspect. But we see as the novel goes on that neither one is sufficient to make it through the world. So we have this first meeting between Natasha and Andrei, and this is while Andrei is sort of at the nadir of his life. He's really unhappy with his marriage. He hates his family. He doesn't want to be part of society, but he also doesn't really like being secluded on his estate. And he thinks it's all over for him. And he meets Natasha, this young, vibrant girl full of joy and passion, and it almost unlocks a part of him that he didn't know existed, right? And he's almost amazed that such a person can even exist, that this type of innocence, this type of naivety, this joyfulness is even possible in this world that he sees as so gray and dead and empty and lifeless. For Andrei, his meeting with Natasha is the biggest thing that has ever happened to him. And for Natasha, as they say, it's Tuesday. She doesn't care. He's just an old guy who shows up at her house. He doesn't say anything. They don't really talk to each other. They share one dance. But she dances with everybody. She's always happy to dance. She doesn't care who she dances with. So we have this sort of meeting that's almost a one-sided meeting. Andrei meets Natasha, but Natasha doesn't properly meet Andrei. In a sense, it's almost impossible for Natasha to meet Andrei as the person that he is, because while he can look back at his childhood, say, or he has the experience in the world to be able to understand Natasha's view of life. Even if he doesn't share it, he can see by looking at her how she sees the world. Natasha, on the other hand, she's very self-centered, not in the way that children are. She's very self-centered, almost solipsistic. It would be impossible for her to understand Andrei's perspective, his jadedness, his cynicism. That's just not something that she can relate to, that she can imagine as a possible perspective of the world. And that's why this meeting is so one-sided. So then we have Andrei proposing to Natasha, but with this stipulation that she's so young that she should take a lot of time to think about it and try to understand what this actually means. We have this initial elation on the part of Natasha that turns into a sort of depression because, well, Andrei understands where he's coming from when he asks her to marry him. He knows what marriage is. For Natasha, marriage is an imaginary thing. So at first she's over the world, over the moon. She thinks, wow, I'm going to be married. This is amazing. I have a husband. He's someone even my father respects. This is so cool. But then because he leaves her so much time to think, she sort of thinks herself into these circles and ends up thinking herself into a depression. And this is sort of the way this type of thing goes. When you have all the time in the world to think about something that you have no knowledge of, no possibility of knowledge of, no real experience of the situation, really the only thing you can do is speculate. And when you speculate in circles and you allow your emotions to get involved in your speculation, it'll almost always lead to some sort of depression or even disappointment, disillusionment in this thing you haven't even seen yet, right? It's like if you try to imagine yourself in a new job, something you've never done, you've never even seen people do it. How are you supposed to come up with a reasonable estimation of what it's going to be like? You simply can't. So you're trapped in this imaginary world, and this is where Natasha finds herself. And this is what leads to Natasha's fall in the midpoint of the novel. So Natasha, she's gone through this elation and this disappointment, and she's at an all-time low. And this is when Kurgan shows up. And Anatole Kuragin, not to get too much into him, but he's a bit of a scoundrel. He's already married, and yet he flirts with Natasha and tries to take her away. And really, the upshot of this is an unfortunate lesson to Natasha about trust, about her naivete, because she has gone through life in her sort of bubble believing that everybody has her best interests in mind, and therefore the idea of betrayal is, like with marriage, it's almost impossible for her to conceive of. She has no conception of this because she has no real experience of it happening. And so she throws herself in Kurrigan's arms. It all falls to naught, and then she's even more depressed than ever. So when Natasha and Andrei meet near to the end of the novel, we have Andrei, who's been wounded in war, who is now an invalid and is no longer a practical man. He's sick in bed and has to be taken care of. Natasha is no longer the child she once was, but has learned that one has to be a bit more careful about one's interactions with the world, who one chooses to love and trust. That it's not simply a case where you can love everybody and they will reciprocate it in a very nice fashion, but that some people have bad intentions and some people cannot be trusted in the same way. You have to develop defenses against the world. And this is the difference between something like a heavenly love and something like an earthly love. And we see this in Dostoevsky's The Idiot and many other characters throughout literature, this naive person who gets taken advantage of by the world because even if they are quote-unquote perfect in their pure, unadulterated, unlimited love for the world itself is not perfect. And if you carry forward in your life in this kind of innocence, you will suffer for it, right? Through no fault of your own. And this is what Natasha has learned. On the other hand, we have Andrei on his deathbed. And I think this is one of the most sort of amazing, some of the most beautiful work in literature, I think. These final sequences with Andrei as he faces his own death and transitions from his earthly material philosophy to something not of this world, something heavenly, something immaterial. And we see Andrei transform not into a naive person, not into an innocent person. It's not like he's regressed in some way to a second childhood like you sometimes see. He's still the mature, knowledgeable person, and a person with understanding of the world. And yet, because of his condition, because of his circumstances, he's able to develop a type of love that is essentially impossible for a normal person. At the end of Andrei's life, he feels a sort of pure, unadulterated love for all things and all people in the world, in a way that's almost impossible to describe. And the reason he is capable of this type of love is because he is incapable of action. Because action brings about self-interest, right? As soon as you are capable of action, capable of exerting yourself in the world, there is this, you develop this way of looking at the world as means to your ends, right? And when you have to interact with the world, you develop, like I said, these defenses against this world, and it narrows your vision and it narrows your ability to love unconditionally and without limits, right? You have to choose very carefully who you love and who you trust. This is what Natasha has learned. At the end of the novel, Andrei almost has this sort of feeling like Natasha started the book with. This love for everyone and this feeling like everything is connected, that your emotions and the emotions of the entire universe are in sync, right? That you can love purely and within unlimited fashion. Of course, you can't actually live this way, as we've mentioned. The world is not designed for you to live this way. It's impossible to be a human being and live this way. If you're talking about this sort of moral influence that predominates Western society, it's Jesus Christ as the archetype. This person with this ability to love everybody, to forgive everybody. And obviously, this makes him vulnerable, and that's why he ends up being crucified. And so we have this archetype in the Western tradition, this desire to emulate Christ, but this acknowledgement of the impossibility of doing so unless you're willing to suffer the consequences in the way that he did, right? And most of us aren't. I mean, it's impossible. It's not like a real thing you can do as a human, and that's part of the human condition. And I think Andrei's story, Andrei's death, really exemplifies this in kind of a new twist on it. We've seen the idiot, we've seen these characters of naivety who lose out in the end. That's a sort of obvious way of presenting this type. But with Andrei, it's something different. With Andrei, it's something mature. It's something at the end of your life. It's this transition from life to death, from the material world to something more, something heavenly, something that we can't really comprehend. When we have a love story like this, we're dealing with emotions that are not really possible, or a story that is unreal, right? Natasha and Andrei's love is not of this world. That's the simple fact of it. And it's beautiful because of this, right? And we see at the end of the story in the epilogue that Natasha, after Andrei's death, ends up married to Pierre. And I'll probably make another video about Pierre because he's a whole other thing entirely. He's sort of the other strange element of this trichotomy of characters in Make Up War and Peace that almost puts a crazy twist on the whole thing, but not for right now. But when she ends up with Pierre, that's not a heavenly love. That's not a tragic love. That's a very simple, earthly sort of thing. And really, rather than lovers, they're very good friends who realize they can live together. And that's sort of the final conclusion for Natasha. She has to live on. You know, the thing with Andrei, or her love with relationship with Andrei, it is this brief thing, this fleeting thing. It's not possible to go on forever. And when he's gone, she has to live in this world and eat and breathe and sleep. And she has to find someone to do that with, and in the end that is the function of Pierre and Natasha's marriage. In another way, they're sort of carrying on the spirit of Andrei because they're both good friends with him. They both acknowledge in some sense that he was in some sense better than both of them. And at least in his final moments. And he had this sort of respectability, this nobility that Pierre aspired to and could not achieve, and in a certain sense Natasha aspired to and could not achieve. So that is, in an extremely rambling and perhaps incomprehensible fashion, that is the love between Natasha and Andrei from War and Peace. Really one of those just amazing things in literature that really has no equal. It's such an amazing story. There's so much to it, so much complexity to these characters that I didn't even get into today because, I'm covering kind of the basics of it. But I hope you've gained something from this discussion today. If you've watched without understanding the book before, you've never read it, hopefully I've encouraged you to believe that it is something worth reading and worth exploring in your own time. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.